sit corrected.
I'm very sorry. Okay, our first order, let me start over. Is the CNET ready? You guys are good? Okay, very good. Welcome to the January 3rd reorganization meeting of College Township Council. My name is Adam Brumbaugh. I am the Township Manager. Our first order of business at the reorganization meeting today will be the swearing in of our newly elected officials, Mr. Dustin Best and Mr. Eric Bernier. I'm very pleased to have with us Judge Kaylee here to actually commence with the oath of office. And I'll turn the floor over to you, Judge, and you may call up your first with me.
Where do we need to stand?
Let's go over by that flag and then I can take a picture after this.
Yes, so if you could just raise your right hand, I'll read the oath at the end. If you agree to state, I will. I, Dustin Best, do solemnly swear that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth, and that I will discharge the duties of council member in College Township, Center County with fidelity. I will. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Bernier.
Yes, sir. I, Eric Bernier, do solemnly swear that I will support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this Commonwealth, and that I will discharge the duties of college member of College Township, Center County, with fidelity.
I do.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, you just sign
Yeah, I will do that.
Sign that afterwards.
Yes, indeed.
Welcome back.
Thank you, Judge. Moving on with the balance of the reorganization committee, I'd now ask all of you that are able to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. And the flag has been relocated.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our first order of reorganization business will be nominations for the chair of College Township Council for 2022. Are there any nominations?
Mr. Temporary Chair, I nominate Rich Frank as for 2022 College Township Chair.
I will second.
Moved in second. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Frank. The balance of the agenda is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate it from my peers. The next item is nominations requested for vice chair.
Mr. Chair, I nominate Carlos Stilson for Vice Chair.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Takak seconds. Any further discussion or nominations? We'll close the nominations, call the question. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Hearing none, motion carries. Congratulations, Ms. Stilson.
Thank you. You too, Mr. Frank.
So, as we embark on this 2022 year, month number 21 of the pandemic, or something like that, I think it's a good opportunity to look back at some things that we did in over the past couple of years. And one of those is we established a vision and mission statement. And those can be found on the College Township Council website. College Township's vision statement is, College Township shall be a model of excellence in local government, a well-planned community with equal opportunity for all. I join my peers. We will endeavor to do that in 2022. Our mission statement. The mission of College Township is to protect and enhance quality of life while facilitating responsible growth and maintaining harmony between rural and urban areas in an efficient and responsible manner for all its citizens. Moving on to new business, we have an extensive list of COG committee and regional appointments. I'm going to go through these fast and furious. I don't believe I need to do the first meetings, but representing College Township in the COG committees, in the executive committee would be myself, in finance committee, myself as well, Mr. Human Resources, Mr. Best, Parks Capital, Mr. Best, Public Safety, Mr. Takak, Land Use and Community Infrastructure, Lucy, Mr. Bernier, Facilities, Mr. Bernier, Climate Action and Sustainability, Ms. Stilson, Parks and Rec Governance Ad Hoc, Mr. Frank, General Forum, all of us. And one point of note, College Township will be chairing the General Forum this year and COG. Moving into regional and general committees, LTAC, Ms. Stilson, Spring Creek Watershed Delegate, Mr. Takak, the Watershed Alternate, Mr. Sharp, the Center Area Cable Consortium, Mr. Best, CCMPO Coordinating, Mr. Bernier, College Township IDA Liaison, Mr. Takak, Center County Solid Waste Advisory Committee, Ms. Stilson, and finally, PSAT's Voting Delegate, Mr. Takak. Any concerns with any of those assignments? I don't believe we need action. Those are by consensus, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Very good. As always, I'm sure the College Township delegates to all the COG and other committees will lead the way. Moving on to consent agenda. Consent agenda consists of CA1, appointment of all College Township committee alternates with full force vote as needed. CA2, appointment of Lewis T. Glantz and Johnson as College Township Solicitor for 2022. CA3, 2022 Auditing Services, Fedori, Fideli, Snyder, Carruthers, appointment of. CA4, reappointment of all current College Township staff members to their current positions and the additional appointments of the following for 2022. Mr. Brumbaugh is the Township Manager/Secretary, the Right to Know Officer, the Tax Collection Committee Delegate, the Privacy Official, and the Security Officer. Mr. Franson is the Local Traffic Advisory Committee, CCMPO Technical Committee. Mr. Long is the Township Treasurer and Tax Collection Committee First Alternate. Ms. Kerner is the Local Traffic Advisory Committee, as well as Mr. Northridge. Ms. Snyder is the Assistant Township Secretary and Tax Collection Committee Second Alternate and the Assistant Right to Know Officer. CA5 consists of appointment of Trans Associates and Keller Engineering as College Township Consulting Engineers for 2022. CA6 is the adjusted wage rate schedule for 2022. CA7 is the Township Manager Employment Agreement. CA8 is Disposition of Records Resolution 22-01. CA9 is the Sewer Enforcement Officer's Fee Schedule, Resolution 22-02. CA10 is the appointment of Sewage Enforcement Officers for 2022 as presented. Mr. Walt Snyder, Dr. Walt Snyder, Mr. Corey Warner, Mr. James Royer, Mr. Robert Royer Jr., Mr. Jonathan Long, and Mr. Brian Rowan. CA11 is the Center Region Code Building Permits and Building Inspection Fees Resolution R-22-03. CA12, Authorities, Boards, and Commission Matters, Appointments and reappointments to Authorities, Boards, and Commissions. Mr. Don Hartzell to the College Township Water Authority through 2026. Mr. Ray Forziat to the Industrial Development Authority through 2026. Mr. Coons to the IDA through 2025. Mr. Hood to the IDA as an alternate through 2023. Mr. Anthony Fergola to the IDA as an alternate through 2023. Mr. Bill Sharp to the IDA through 2026. Mr. Ron Smith to the Local Traffic Advisory Committee through 2025. Mr. Dave Wasson to the Vacancy Board through 2021. Mr. William Sharp is the Spring Creek Watershed Commission first alternate through 2021. Jude's,
Will you correct that to 2022, those last two?
okay?
Sorry.
Yes, sorry, apologize. Again, Mr. Wasson to the Vacancy Board through 2022. Mr. Sharp as the Watershed Committee first alternate through 2022. Jude Simpson to the Parks and Rec Committee through 2026. Kathy Madison to the Parks and Rec Committee through 2026. Peggy Ekdahl to the Planning Commission through 2025. And finally, Mr. Cleased through to the Zoning Hearing Board through 2026. CA 13 is appointment of the following financial institutions as depositories for College Township funds for the year 2022. The First National Bank of Pennsylvania, PA Local Government Investment Trust, and Kish Bank. And finally, CA 14, setting a mileage reimbursement rate at the federal IRS rate. Does anyone wish any of the consent agenda items pulled for discussion? If not, I will accept the motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Bernier. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Takak seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Hearing none, motion carries. Mr. Manager, I believe that completes our reorganization.
Thank you.
At this point, I'll accept a motion to adjourn the reorganization meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Bernier, and I will second. We are adjourned. Will do.
No pressure.
All right, very good. We will now call to order this Monday, January 3rd, 2022 meeting, regular meeting of the College Township Council. Having already conducted the Pledge of Allegiance, we'll move on to public open discussion. Does anybody wish to speak to council on any matters that aren't on today's agenda? Hearing or seeing none, we'll move on to reports. Manager's update.
No report today, Mr. Chair.
Very good. I assume none of us have any COG reports since we haven't sat on our committees yet. Staff have any other reports to present?
Nothing at this time.
Very good. And we'll move on to the consent agenda for the regular meeting. I didn't print that out. All right, today's January 3rd consent agenda consists of CA1, minutes from the December 16th, 2021 council meeting, the December 28th, 2021 public hearing on the 2022 College Township budget, and finally the December 28th special council meeting minutes. CA2 correspondence, we received a letter from the Center County Housing and Land Trust dated December 15th, 2021, thanking for commitment to the Center County Housing and Land Trust. We have a letter from Dustin Best dated December 20th, 2021 regarding resignation from the Parks and Recreation Committee effective December 31st, 2021. We have a letter from Center Region Parks and Recreation Authority dated December 17th, 2021 regarding time extension for township review to February 15th, 2022. We have a letter from Geisinger dated December 20th, 21 regarding land development extension. Finally, we have CA3 action item, College Township Policy P18, Tornado Emergency Plan Safety Policy. Does anyone wish any of those items pulled for future or further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I believe that we also have a CA2E item, which is a request for time extension of 90 days from Pennsylvania State University for the Palmer Museum of Art.
Oh, okay, I see it now. Or no, I do not see it. Okay. I will take your word for it.
It's in there, it just wasn't on the
Okay.
agenda.
Does anybody wish any of those items pulled for further discussion? If none, I'll accept the motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Hearing none, motion carries. On to old business. Pedestrian Facilities Master Plan. I believe Mr. Bloom is leading this one out.
Will do. Give me 1 second here while I get everything pulled up. Thank you, Jen. All right, so as you recall, at our last meeting of council on December 16th, we discussed the draft walkable College Township Pedestrian Facilities Master Plan. And the intent of this item tonight, or this afternoon, excuse me, is to continue that discussion so that staff will be better prepared to give you a 100% draft at your second meeting this month. So without further ado, I will just dive in. Just as a refresher, the goal to provide an interconnected, continuous, and well-maintained network of sidewalks, shared use paths, and other related facilities that provide all users, regardless of age and ability, with safe, efficient access to numerous key destinations throughout College Township and the center region. That's what we're aiming for. That's the big picture that this plan is trying to achieve. So what you have as part of the agenda packet is a slight move forward. Obviously, we've had the holidays in between our last meeting, so I'm calling this our 80% draft. It did incorporate some of the suggestions that council had given at the last meeting, and we'll continue updating this draft as you provide additional feedback today. Our discussion today is really focusing on three things, and that's the proposed future network, the recommendations that are in the draft plan, as well as the implementation strategy. And you'll recall at the last meeting, what I did was prepared a few initial review questions. I'm just going to follow that same template just to kind of keep us all on task. What we're seeking here today is council's confirmation on the direction of the plan. In particular, does the proposed future network achieve an equity of access? You'll recall that term, and I'll talk about it a little bit more when I get into that slide. And again, the way the network was broken down, not sold on these terms, but that's what we have right now, are the core, secondary, and feeder, as well as greenway connections as part of the overall network. Do the recommendations provide adequate direction? And finally, does the implementation strategy capture all the key tasks that council envisions for the pedestrian facilities master plan? In terms of the proposed future network, I hope you had some opportunity to look at the online mapping program that Shane had developed. Again, that's a tremendous tool, and I encourage you to spend additional time with that and familiarize yourself with kind of how we built up to this point. As you recall, we used the term equity of access, and what we were trying to do is establish that as an initial measure of effectiveness for this plan, and it evaluates if a neighborhood is either well-served, and that's what's shaded in blue. Unfortunately, you can't see real well on here, but you can see that on the mapping app, or underserved, which is shaded in the pink color, in terms of access to the core pedestrian facilities, or those red alignments that you see there on the picture. What we're trying to do is the proposed network attempts to raise all of the underserved neighborhoods to at least the bare level of well-served by connecting them in some manner to the core pedestrian facilities, or to that red alignment that you see on the map there. So I wanted to take just a couple minutes and get your thoughts as you've had a chance to look at the proposed network. I don't want to do a deep dive, but did it make sense? What we were trying to do here, did it achieve what you were hoping as council people to reach that level or equity of access across the community. So I will stop there, Mr. Chair, and I just take a second to let you go around the table for any initial feedback.
Sounds great. Mr. Bernier, you rarely get to speak, haven't been able to speak first for the past year, so we're going to start with you.
Yeah, but I wasn't shy about speaking last, was I? Mike, I haven't gotten through it to the level of detail, but I will tell you, from what I've seen, yes. Less so underserved, because I think you begin to address the underserved when you just look at it. Because if you look at it, especially in the manner that you've structured this, and the obvious missing links or pieces, when you address them, then you, in most cases, begin to address the underserved. So from the sense of prioritizing underserved, when you have ties, or we have multiple equal challenges, then yes, I would support that. But I think the plan itself, by virtue of the way you structured it, as we work through it, will accomplish that.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, that's, I'll be honest there, that's kind of what I'm looking for, is just to make sure that's we're hitting that mark. If there are particular connections that council would like to talk about, I'd prefer probably do that offline, so we don't take an extended meeting here, but that's the overarching goal that I'm looking for today. Are we hitting the mark?
No.
Carla?
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I have some, I guess, more specific, more, maybe not core, but maybe not feeder either, secondary comments.
Okay.
Okay, so I could talk all day about how awesome this site, the Walkable College Township page is. But that's not what you want to hear. So, the titles for each of the headings, each of the maps, I will just say I think we're gonna lose some of our audience there. Even I had to read them a few times to figure out which one I was looking at, and I speak the language to, maybe a C+ level at this point. So that's just one comment. Another one is sorry, I have to bounce back and forth between two pages. The pedestrian network map has old cat stops. You probably know that. That was just something I noticed. And then finally, I only have one more kind of nitty-gritty comment, and that's on this map that you're showing right now. Which one is that? Existing?
This is the future proposed
Future.
network. Yep.
Got it. Okay, thanks. When I was clicking through that and working through that, I had to turn the map off and back on to see what disappeared and came back,
Okay.
to know what I was looking at.
Sure.
Just because there was no key.
All right.
So if there could be a key so that I'm not constantly like, oh, what do those lines mean? And then I have to kind of click through turning things on and off till I figure out what that line means.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's so fast, it's so smooth, it's just everything I want to know is in there. It's just really amazing.
Great. No, that's great. I appreciate the feedback, Carla, and I will send that on to Shane, and he'll have it done probably.
Yeah,
in an hour.
exactly. They're all little things, so
Okay, great.
awesome. Thanks.
Just to confirm, so you're suggesting on the walkable State College, maybe a little more user-friendly titling? Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, we can work on that,
okay,
definitely.
great. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to second what Carla said about how great the website is, and the amount of information there is just amazing. The challenge, of course, then, is how do you make it simple enough to access that complexity? So I was even wondering, maybe a couple of them, I don't know if they can be combined as kind of click on and off overlays.
Sure.
Because there are overlays that you can do. For example, on the future connections, I really like the fact that you can turn off the whiteout for the different municipalities. So you can look just at College Township or you can click it and you can look broader and say, okay, this is how that ties into what the borough is doing or whatever. I don't know to what extent we can put those things together, but I think finding that right balance of detail and usability is gonna be the challenge. I mean, I think clarifying will help, but it's also, it's a challenge to work your way through it. It isn't like obvious. There may be the second level. The only other thing, and maybe this is for a separate discussion, there's two things that continue to just leap out at me that are ends. You know, on Pike Street, it just ends and doesn't continue on to College Avenue, and I understand that there's lots of real challenges there. Also, Orchard Road, you know, it just sort of ends at the fields. And, you know, so just those two pieces, I wonder if we might be able to extend those, because I think, you know, even given geographic challenges and other things, I think that still would be ideal if we could close those loops. But otherwise, this is great, and please, thank you for everything you've done.
Great, thank you.
Dustin?
Yeah, so I want to resound exactly pretty much what's been said so far, right? You know, a legend, so you don't have to click on and off, and really just putting an overlay. I think you could probably combine all of these maps into maybe one or two, as Paul had said, right? And you think about, you know, the Center GIS website, right? How they have those click on those overlays and things like that, you know, maybe something along those lines. And I did want to resound again what Paul had mentioned. It leaped out at me immediately, because I remember when I made public comment about it, which interestingly enough didn't show up on the shaded, from the Pike Street over to 26, because I had personally made that comment at that time, because there is no connection to the Spring Creek Elementary School for Lamont. So your kids could feasibly ride their bikes, maybe even walk if they wanted to, or even over to the park there, without, you know, having to go the whole way up and around, right? So if that's something we can achieve, I think that would be huge. That's all I have.
Great, thank you.
Mike, I think everybody hit this, what a daunting task of making it simply complex or complexly simple. But I think we're off to the races with it, and if we can just tweak a little bit more towards that, I think you absolutely got it.
That's great. I appreciate the feedback, and we will continue to fine tune in advance of our next meeting on the 20th. And obviously, this thing is a draft until finalized. And anyone that knows me knows I don't like plans, I like processes. So, you know, the way I take this is even once it's adopted, it's still a living document that can continue to be evolved.
Sorry, I do have more comments about the draft itself. I thought we were just talking about.
Oh, and I dive in even further than this.
Do you want
Are
comments
you
about?
talking specific?
I'm not sure. I have comments about the draft. I thought, and when I read in the memo, I thought you wanted comments about future pedestrian facility prioritization matrix.
Yeah, I'll get there.
Oh, we're not there.
Yep,
Perfect.
Not there yet.
Okay, I thought maybe the agenda item was over.
No, just this piece.
Perfect. Didn't mean to delay.
No,
Mr. Bloom.
yeah, I don't do short
I appreciate it.
All right, thank you again. I appreciate the comments, and we'll continue to work with Shane and tweak this. But to your point, I think we're in a good place, so I appreciate the feedback. In terms of the recommendations, and again, this is part of that three-part area that we were looking for some thoughts. Recommendations can be broken down into two real kind of segments. First is regulatory, and I messed up my slide there, so that bugs me already. And the other piece is future pedestrian projects in the matrix, as Carla referenced. Under regulatory, some of the modifications, and I'm going to get into a little bit more detail with each of these, is amend the existing ordinances to include a fee in lieu. That's something we've talked about at some length over my full tenure here, to be frank. Also, modify the process for granting of sidewalk waivers, and again, I'll touch on that a little bit more. What I heard from council previously is that the waivers are something that we should be using very few and far between, if ever. So the fee in lieu basically replaces the waivers, but there's still some room there for that discussion. Strengthen the requirements for transit facilities, slight changes to the facility design requirements, evaluation of the regional park path use policy, and I know there's some ongoing discussions about that, but we reference it in the plan as it is, and then some revisions to official map, and that section will grow after we get to the point where we're comfortable with the full network as it's built out. But I want to take a little bit of time with each of these sections just to talk through kind of where the draft plan is at and gauge how council feels about where we're headed. So fee in lieu. What we're trying to do with fee in lieu is strike a balance. And that's where the fee in lieu is fair to all parties involved, the developer, to us, to the citizens. And it must be viewed, from a developer's perspective, it must be viewed as viable, but maybe not necessarily an attractive option. In an opportunity where developers may be looking to seek relief from some construction obligation, we don't want to make it so attractive that they immediately default to paying the fee in lieu. There's got to be a little sting associated with it, quite frankly. From the township perspective, our priority remains to see the expansion of the pedestrian facilities network. We will defer to the sidewalk fee in lieu where it makes sense, but ultimately our goal is to continue to expand that network. A lot of words on this slide, I apologize, but again, just kind of walking through. The proposed fee in lieu would only be enacted with council's concurrence with staff that no viable alternative routes are available. And in that case, the developer has a burden of proof. They must prove that construction of a sidewalk is exceedingly difficult due to site constraints. And we list out some of the constraints there. They may include, but not limited to, topography, presence of utilities, inadequate right-of-way or easement, negative safety impacts, potential violation of other township ordinances, the distance to connect to existing or planned facilities is significant, or the construction of a facility is cost prohibitive to the project due to any of the aforementioned reasons. As we've sat through these discussions, particularly those that have been around the table for a while, and obviously Dustin, I know you've been tuned into this as well. Oftentimes when developers come before us, there's issues with developing sidewalks. We want them to come to us and tell us why these things aren't viable, and then leave that decision in the hands of both staff and council as to whether or not fee in lieu is a potential.
So you're telling me the fact that there's not already a sidewalk is not a reason for a waiver?
Correct.
Okay.
In order for the township to entertain the waiver, entertain a fee in lieu, the developer needs to provide some evidence, and we're looking for engineered drawings, estimates of the sidewalk costs, construction cost, and a map indicating the distance to the nearest existing or planned facility. We want them to show us that this facility does not make sense for a variety of reasons. And this is the first look that we've given you at a proposed fee structure. I worked with Dawn on this to develop a fee structure. $60 per square yard, $500 per ADA ramp in addition to the square yard cost. And those fees, like any of our fees, can be evaluated and revised annually or as needed by the township. So again, this is our first look. We had talked about different ways to do this previously, but we kind of settled in on this after some discussions with the township engineers. So I'll stop there, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to get your initial thoughts on fee in lieu. Is it headed in the right direction?
Great. Carly, we'll start with you.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so I am pleased with everything. I have made a comment before, and I'll just make it again as it comes to looking at these ordinances when we're talking about the sidewalks and pedestrian facilities. And that is in R1 development, the neighborhood development, I still think about the cost of housing as well as impervious square footage and stormwater management, things like that. And sidewalks stand in the way of all of those things. And so I'm still of the opinion that they're not always necessary, especially in cul-de-sacs, places like that. So I know that that's like a huge discussion potentially, but I would still really appreciate at least the chance for council and staff to take a look at that. Maybe there are some other municipalities that incorporate some either relaxed sidewalk requirements for those types of situations where there's really not a whole lot of traffic on a road. Or maybe some allowance for some for that being a waiver, like a waiver situation on a cul-de-sac, a small cul-de-sac, something like that.
Did it?
Yeah,
Good.
thanks.
Paul?
Yeah, I'm supportive of that, for sure. We dealt with the Parkland fee in lieu, some considerations about potential legal action. Is there precedent for similar things with sidewalks? I would just want to make sure that we have an eye toward ensuring that whatever we do doesn't get tied up in Commonwealth Court for years and years, and make sure that what we have is really.
Once we have a final draft that is ready to be forwarded on to Planning Commission, Parks and Recreation for their review and comment, we would need to get the entirety of the program in front of the solicitor for that review. So that has not, at this point in time, happened. Based on the direction of the plan to this point, I don't see that there are significant barriers in that regard. The difficulty with the parkland fee in lieu has to do with the prevalence or the authority that is, the control that is exerted by the municipality's planning code, the MPC. That's where we have a little higher bar in terms of some of the legal ramifications, legal aspects of that fee, because it's already stipulated in a Commonwealth document. In this case, I believe that we have the latitude to do the things that we're discussing here, but again, it still needs to go for full review to the solicitor.
Just to put a pin in it for the future, I think it would be good to know whether there is precedent for legal action for such fees. The only other thing that I had was a real quick question. Those dollar amounts, the fee structure that you proposed, are those based on traditional concrete 5-foot wide sidewalks or
Correct.
shared use paths, or are they similar? Because I can see some instances where it may make more sense to want a shared use path as opposed to.
Well, it's a square yard cost, so if we were looking at a 5-foot wide sidewalk, how many feet does it take to take a square yard, whereas if we're looking at
Oh,
an
I see what
8-foot
you're
wide
saying. Yeah, you're not
path.
looking at linear feet.
So per linear foot, your shared use path would be a more expensive cost.
More expensive.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the only other thing that really occurred to me. I don't know whether we would want to build in something like that and kind of, I can envision some scenarios where we might want to connect a shared use path as opposed to a sidewalk to maybe some existing facilities.
And it's a good point, Paul, and I've even caught it as I've gone through the draft. When we initially talked about this, we were talking strictly sidewalk. And even the reference to sidewalk fee in lieu, I tripped over it as I was even preparing this. I think we need to probably pull that back and make it a pedestrian facilities fee in lieu. And to Dawn's point, by tying it to the square yard, if it comes back and we say what we want here is a shared use path, then the square yard cost is still applicable. It's just a,
Right.
how
Just
big of
have
a
a
path are
small
you
area,
making?
yeah.
What's the bandwidth in terms of what you're looking for? So I absolutely hear what you're saying, and like I said, that's something I caught. I even referenced it a couple times in this presentation about sidewalk fee in lieu. That's not really what we're after.
It's kind of limiting.
Yeah,
as
we're
much as-
looking
yeah.
for those pedestrian facilities. As, we kind of expanded the scope of the plan, that needs to expand along with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for other members of council, but I would be comfortable with trying to incorporate that sort of language. Would submit that.
Okay.
That's it.
Dustin?
Yeah, so I'm in support of both what Carla and Paul had mentioned too, and it's intriguing to me because Carla talks about that, which I never thought about it in that sense, right? And I used to live in Cortland Drive area, and there's not a lot in Lamont, and then there's not a lot of traffic there, right? I don't really think there's a need for a sidewalk there. But what could be interesting there, and we look at it with, and ties into what Paul's saying, connections from various streets or access points along shared use paths, things like that, could build into this structure, right? I think that's a very viable conversation. Yeah.
Good. Eric?
Question, has Planning Commission seen what we saw at the last meeting?
not yet.
So we're pretty far ahead of them in this.
Yeah, and you'll see towards the end of this is what we wanted to do is get to the point where council's comfortable with it before we ask you to remit it to Planning Commission and Parks and Rec.
Okay. I agree with the idea that's been floated that, there might be circumstances where it doesn't make sense for sidewalks. However, it seems to me, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, that we have a mechanism in place for evaluating first, the fee in lieu, the fee in lieu and the waiver. Isn't that the format, though, for someone to make the case that it's not allowed? I don't know that we need to have a third mechanism in place for that. I agree that many situations, but it seems to me the process is already in place to make that case, if I'm
Yeah.
understanding
Back it up.
what you're saying.
Right there. So constraints may include but are not limited to. I mean, affordability could be
Right.
an issue here.
Yeah,
Picking
or-
up on your.
I think he's talking about the matrix, though.
Well, no,
No.
just speaking in broad terms, what I heard Carla say, and I agree. But it seems to me that this is where you would make that case, isn't it? Or am I looking at this too
No,
simply?
I think you're right, and it goes down to that bottom line about construction cost is prohibitive to the project. I tie it back to the aforementioned reasons, but there may be other reasons that are there to Carla's point. I think a lot of it has to do with how we fine tune the ordinance as this is implemented. This is floating the concept, but I agree with you, Eric, that I think it's in there. We just haven't necessarily set it to the point where it satisfies the concern yet.
Yeah, and I'll close with this. Like Rich has often said, don't let perfect be the enemy of best. And I want to caution folks that I think what we're trying to do is get our arms around something and get a good, solid shell in place. So we have nothing right now. And put it out there. Run it up, run some real live cases up against it and adjust, as needed. So maybe, one additional bullet point here could reference Carla's example. If you live on a cul-de-sac and there's no through traffic, maybe it just doesn't make sense. Maybe there's no inherent need. So if there was a term you could add there.
Inherent need.
And let this be the place where you make that case.
No,
Good.
it makes sense to me.
Yeah, my only the fee in lieu, I think this is the beginning of the change of mindset completely. Council's been beating this drum for a while, a lot of the members here. Down to staff, down to planning commission, we want the connectivity and everything. So the immediate answer is no when they come in and ask for a waiver and everything. And, the same with the sidewalk to nowhere, yeah, that's going nowhere. So, we go with there. As far as the individual fees, have you looked at, there's other municipalities in the region doing fee in lieu for sidewalks. Is it comparable, or are we leading, are we first out with this and everything? If we can just take a look.
Sure.
It's not gonna guide us, but it'll benchmark. To Carla's point, I agree completely on the residential, the sidewalk potentially creates affordability barriers and everything like that. The only thing that gives me pause on that, how many times have we been beaten up because there's no sidewalks in a development? That it's dangerous, it's this, it's that, and everything. So it's a double-edged sword on that. And I think the inherent need might do it. But I do know that affordability, some of these older neighborhoods, the reason they're affordable is because they don't have sidewalks, or they don't have this, or they don't have that, and everything. So we need to keep that in mind for future councils that are gonna get beat up about why certain facilities aren't in place. And to Paul's point, that, absolutely, the ordinance has gotta be tight, although this isn't unprecedented. So I think there should be some availability on there. Are we gonna get sued? That can always happen. It depends on how tight your ordinance is, whether it's got any legs. The other thing we always need to keep in mind is to the shared use, you know, there's what we want, and then there was what is required. And we kind of had this on the Millbrook Marsh thing. What is required is a 5-foot sidewalk. What we want, what we ideally would like, is a multi-use path, is what I heard from that last discussion. So we need to be careful that we don't create a conflict on that, or we need to be prepared to put, if that's what we want, then we need to put our money to it. So, you know, that's something to always keep in mind too. And there's horse trading to a degree. You know, okay, yeah, you don't have to put it all around, but we want a multi-use path here. And so those judgments are, I think the criteria is going to help a lot. So that's all I have.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, continuing on, waivers. As I mentioned early on, what I heard from council was we weren't exactly fond of doing waivers because we didn't have enough tools in the toolbox to do something else. But you know, we don't want to completely remove the idea of waivers. This is probably the one that I'm the least comfortable with how it's worded because it's left a little open to interpretation. So we kind of have it set up right now that there are two potential avenues for waivers. One, if the proposed project represents little to no change to the existing character of a parcel or parcels within the growth boundary, and the inclusion of a pedestrian facility would, one, provide little benefit to the overall community connectivity, and two, is redundant due to the availability of adjacent facilities. The other avenue is if the proposed project is located outside the regional growth boundary, and again, hits those two boxes, provides little benefit to connectivity and is redundant based on adjacent facilities. Like I said, this is the one where I think we probably still need to do a little bit of work tightening it up some, but it starts to get into that place where you were, Carla, with R1 is, okay, if you're within the growth boundary, but putting this facility in makes no sense, is that an opportunity, or there's no inherent need, I guess, to steal Eric's term, is that an opportunity to consider a waiver? And that's where I think there's some judgment there with Planning Commission and Council. This thing isn't going to be so locked down that you don't have that little bit of flexibility. So throw this out there as kind of food for thought for council in terms of how to deal with waivers and limiting them, but not completely restricting them.
Ready for us? Paul?
Okay, great, thanks. I actually thought one thing to simplify it would be to put these two together because with the exception of what's underlined, it would be the same. So one thing that I was thinking was, just to your point, if there was some way to phrase it as if there's little to no improvement in pedestrian access or connections, something like that that references, rather than existing character, but references the facilities and what we want out of it, or is located outside of the regional growth boundary. I mean, I think that could be sort of parenthetical to what the main thrust is there. But that was what really jumped out to me, was that they were kind of the same thing. And it is more about the pedestrian facilities, and I love the example of the cul-de-sac because it doesn't change the character of the parcel, but it doesn't improve pedestrian access in any way. That was my thought on that, but that's all I had on this.
Great. Dustin?
So help me out with this a little bit. If I'm a developer, if I read this, right, there's a fee in lieu, and then there's a waiver, right? There's two tracks that I can take.
Sure.
What's gonna keep me from just three?
You can build the
Well,
sidewalk.
actually, I can
Build the sidewalk.
Right, thank you. So what's gonna keep the developers from just going right after the waiver?
Right. And that's where we need to work on the language, both in the plan and in the ordinance. Initially, when I was drafting this, that first bullet point about within the growth boundary wasn't even there. But I felt like that was too restrictive. You know, basically the only way you could get a waiver under that scenario was if you were outside the growth boundary. That's the only time we would entertain waivers. That seemed too restrictive, and that's kind of where we got to this point. And like I said, I'm not fully comfortable with it, Dustin. I don't know that I've hit the mark with it yet. I think we're getting closer with where Paul, with his suggestions. I just want to make sure that when we're done with this, that we stick the landing. That the waivers is an option, but again, going back to the thought with fee and lieu, it's not the most attractive option for a variety of reasons. I think it needs to be a tool in council's toolbox, but not one that everyone jumps on when there's a sidewalk that's a little difficult to build. I don't think I have it perfect yet. To your point, I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I just see the first bullet point, provide little benefit to overall community connectivity, or, just stop it there. I think that's very subjective, right? Anybody can make that argument. Well, this doesn't have, but obviously that would have to be approved, but still, I think that, the subjectivity allows this to be pursued as it stands right now. That's all I have. Thank you.
Agreed. Eric?
Yeah, I agree less is better here. In fact, I might even go further. I wouldn't at all be uncomfortable with leaving it at the regional growth boundary and put the burden on the developer. Because, as Dustin said, we already get, even without this language, people go for the waiver right out of the gate. So I'm a little concerned that if we put in specific exceptions, that we make it burned. At least this early in the process.
Sure.
I'm almost more comfortable leaving it as open and as subjective as possible, because that gives us the subjectivity to deny the waiver. The other comment that I have is we have waivers in other processes, right? How specific are the guidelines or requirements for the waivers noted? How much detail is offered in the guidance we give on other waivers? And maybe we use that, maybe we look at that before we decide, whether we're going with less or more, or how much detail. Because apparently it's worked. We haven't had any problems with it.
Yeah, I think that's something I'd have to spend some time and evaluate, probably with Adam and Lindsay and Dawn. Oh.
So, Eric, the subdivision and land development ordinance does have a section at the beginning regarding waivers, and it's not as stringent as the requirements for a variance, but it's similar, because it does refer to showing a hardship. But it does allow more leeway for the governing body to make those decisions rather than the zoning hearing board with the variance, but they are sort of similar. So there is, that mechanism is already set up in the subdivision and land development plan. Then again, with zoning, anything to modify, would have to be either through the conditional use process in some cases, and the majority of the time, you'd have to prove a hardship to get any modifications or waivers to the zoning hearing board. But in the case of subdivision and land development, yes, we do have that already set up at the beginning of the ordinance. As you guys have all seen from the sidewalk waiver requests in the past.
So I hear the term hardship.
It does actually, I believe it does actually say a hardship within the saldo for a modification.
I'm actually okay with that, because that's kind of what we've been using all along. You've got to show the hardship. I know it's not as specific as you were looking for, but my comment is I'm a little uneasy with getting more specific, this early in the process without having the experience. I'd rather be broader. Let us, use the tool to evaluate a few, hardship cases, and then see if we need to adjust from there.
Okay.
My thoughts.
Is that it? Carla?
Yeah, thanks. Reading it, I don't see how, because it's a waiver, I don't see how broadening it, that just makes the waiver more accessible. The more you tighten the waiver requirements in, the more control we have, so I just apologize, I don't quite understand that idea. But the way I read it, it reads pretty well to me. The only thing I might suggest is that your bullet points lead we need to think about the project prioritization matrix. And maybe we could use, I have no idea, what about using that and a certain score range within that matrix. So if your project represents little to no change to the existing character of the parcel and scores between a 10 and 5 on the prioritization matrix, then you can bring it to council. I mean, I don't know.
That's an interesting approach, something I hadn't thought of.
Just a thought.
I like the idea of using that matrix in other areas,
Sure.
you know, because it sounds like, you know, it's an important tool. So if it can be open to the hardship exercise, if we can open it up to that, all the better.
And I feel like instead of, I mean, we could even take a bunch of the sidewalk waiver requests that have happened in the past few years, some good examples, a smattering of things, and run it through that test and kind of see how it plays out.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Just a thought.
Very good thought. I tend to agree with Paul in that we don't need separate for in and out of the regional growth. I do like Carla's suggestion as a potential mechanism to work through these. I think I'm not, in any presentation, or again, going back to change of mindset, lead out with, council has no desire to grant waivers, you know, but, you know, these are the things. So, you know, set expectation from the word go.
We could put a little sign up there that says waiver-free zone. Don't ask.
Yeah. Please don't ask, so I don't have to tell you no. But yeah, so, you know, just keep pounding it that, you know, that is the path of least
Yeah, well, like I said, this is the one that I was the least comfortable with, and I gauge around the table, it's kind of the same place. I definitely do like where Carla's at with having some kind of mechanism that at least gets you, you know, some rational reason for, okay, you want a waiver, how does it score? Boom, oh, sorry. So let us take a little time with that. I think, you know, I definitely need to do some wordsmithing here regardless of what happens with that, but at the end of the day, I appreciate the feedback, that helps, because I was floundering a little bit on this one, I'll be honest.
Going back to Paul's point about litigation, that kind of interpretation stuff is where you're gonna end up, because they don't agree with your interpretation. And the court is the arbitrator.
I don't like it leaving that subjective, so.
Absolutely.
Transit facilities, this is just kind of enhancing where we're at currently. We're recommending from a staff perspective that the current requirement where we're requiring larger scale developments to provide transit facilities, including bus pads or shelters, be expanded to improvements to pedestrian access to existing transit facilities or transit stops within a quarter mile of the proposed development. It's one thing to have an on-site improvement. What we're doing here is actually pushing the envelope a little bit with quarter mile kind of off-site improvements. And then improvements to the type and condition of those existing stops. We've seen this with some of our plans that have come through where maybe they have a pad currently, but it makes sense based on the scale of the development to move it up to a shelter. We just want to emphasize that in the ordinance, that needs to be done and considered as these larger scale developments start coming in. I'll stop there. This was kind of an easier one to manage.
Dustin?
I really don't have any comments on this one.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Eric?
You know, here's a case where I support the idea of having language in there, but I'm very concerned about the thresholds that we create. And the reason is, if you look at the over 100 improved bus stops in the center region, 80 to 90% of them were done by developers as part of land development plan with no language in the ordinance whatsoever to even require that, you know, less dictate the specific size or whatever. So in some ways, leaving it open has worked very well in the community. So I'm a little concerned about the thresholds that are here in the presentation as far as minimum, in part because of that, and also because we have a lot of situations where it's not a blank slate, and you've got somebody coming in to develop the last piece, and they individually don't meet that threshold, but collectively now you do. So to the extent that that can be addressed, then I feel more comfortable with numbers and thresholds, but don't feel, you know, in all the years that I was doing this, no one ever went to the mat with us.
Sure.
You know, because they were reasonable requests. You know, they were identified needs, reasonable requests were made by the municipalities, and they were built. I think it gets a little stickier, though, when you start putting minimum requirements in.
Okay. No, that makes sense. One of the things we do call out in the draft is, you know, basically trumpeting that success. So, you know, if I'm swinging the pendulum too far, that's what I need to know. So-
Yeah, and that is the challenge, working without any language at all.
Right.
You've got to be able to read the room.
Right.
And, you know when to hold and know when to fold. And that requires a certain level of subjective skill. You know, this is easier. You know, the black and white numbers are easier,
Yep.
but sometimes we may miss the mark. So those are my general thoughts. Support the concept. Not sure we should be as specific, and if we are going to be specific, we need to be really careful.
Okay.
Carla?
My only comment to this, honestly, is just how fluid transit facilities seems to be right now. I mean, I think we're all holding our breath hoping that this is just a pandemic thing, but I'm just not sure how true that is. I mean, it doesn't really say anything to the ordinance, it's just something interesting. I'm just wondering.
Out loud.
Yeah, thanks.
I had exactly that thought through this, like, you know, what's going on with CATA generally and other things. But I want to build on what Eric said, because I was going to actually mention it during discussion of the prioritization matrix itself. But it occurred to me, we used a quarter mile, quarter to three-quarter, and three-quarter for closing existing gaps, proximity to transit stops, proximity to parks and schools. I just don't know whether those are the right numbers. I think it would be interesting to take a look at some real world examples. Sure. To Dustin's point, you know, we're really trying to get to, you know, the elementary school, but it's further than it should be. Or, you know, I don't know whether those are the right numbers. And I think to Eric's point, we may be putting ourselves in a bit of a box when we do that. I think it depends on the specific parcel or what part of town, or, you know, maybe some other things that I just worry about. That in terms of our prioritization, that may be an internal thing, but I don't know that it needs to be part of an ordinance, I guess is what I was getting at.
No, like I said, this is exactly what I'm looking for, because this was our first crack at it, and, you know, what I heard from Eric, I don't take lightly, because obviously I know Eric did this for a lot of years, is, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And
Right.
that's a little bit of where I'm at with this right now.
No, and what I'm saying is this is absolutely a critical criteria,
Yep.
right? The criteria are good, I just don't know whether we're hitting what we want to do by putting hard numbers on it. What if it's three-quarters of a mile? You know, where does it
If
fall?
I could, the answer to the one question is, in the transit industry, three-quarters of a mile is considered walking distance to a transit stop. So just in that
So
world.
that's built on it.
Yeah, if you live within three-quarters of a mile, you live within access to transit service. Unfortunately, that does not take into account anything that lies in between.
Right. Yeah,
And
Bottom Hill,
Yeah,
that goes straight up.
no sidewalks. You know, so there's also another saying in the transit industry, it's not the distance, it's what lies in between. So that's why it seems counterintuitive for me to be sitting here saying, geez, I would like it more open, but that is just based on my experience over the years of having to deal with just those type of variables that you mentioned. You know,
Well, to that point, that's what popped into my mind when I was reading
Sure.
this. So I just wanted to go on record as saying that we could take a look at those.
the last example I would say is sometimes it's better to improve transit access for the developer to build a sidewalk upstream, or in between their site and an already established transit facility, as opposed to building a transit facility on their site that the bus is not going to come within 2 or 3 blocks from. So.
Yeah, hearkening back to an earlier discussion where we talked about the legal construct, we're going to have to be really careful because these are going to be classified potentially as off-site improvements. And off-site improvements can be done as long as there's agreement.
Right.
Mandating off-site improvements are going to get challenged, typically. So I think that's something that, and again, it's that NPC kind of construct that we're dealing in here and considering some of this question.
And we were successful for many years in getting off-site improvements done as part of the horse trading process. If they'd have been mandated, we might have hit a snag.
Right. The only thing, again, the quarter mile, we picked that out of, it's kind of like setbacks, or whatever, where did that number come from and stuff. And I was leaning more towards, maybe a more fluid, in that the existing transit stops are impacted by the development. That's something that could potentially be gauged, and everything. And you could throw in and feasible, but then you're gonna get all kinds of, it's not feasible.
Again, to council, I appreciate all the comments on this. That's great. That helps me kind of tune in where I need to be with this. This one seems like it needs to be a little more nimble than where I'm at with it, and that's perfectly fine. All right.
That's all I have.
Excellent, thanks. Back to you, Mike.
Yeah, facility design requirements. This is just some minor tweaks to existing language. Really, the biggest thing is putting in tree root guards or other methods to protect the facility if would be required. The photo is just illustrative. It doesn't, what we would be requiring, but just so you have some idea of what a tree root guard would be trying to do is avoid that situation where a tree gets planted next to a sidewalk and before long the sidewalk's buckling because the roots are shooting out underneath it. This is just a minor tweak to existing language.
You looking for guidance on this one?
Yeah.
Great, Paul, start.
Oh, thanks. Does the estimated cost per square yard include something like this, or would this be in addition to?
No, actually, I did not include that in the cost.
Just, we may want to consider that.
So the tree requirement might trigger some additional in lieu costs. Anything else?
No, that was it.
Carla?
Nothing.
Eric?
Well, I live this in my neighborhood, so absolutely.
Dustin?
Nothing additional.
No, I agree. I think it just makes sense.
Yeah. If we're going to build it, we should protect it. And
Yes.
That's basically what we're trying to do with this.
So, well, to them too, to the
Absolutely.
homeowner too, or
Sure.
property owner, because they're responsible for maintaining
Yeah,
it.
that was mostly my heartburn, so.
All right, next one was regional park path use policy, and I know, from some of the emails I've seen that this is already an ongoing discussion here in the region. But just to highlight it, current Center Region Park policy requires parks to be closed dusk to dawn. That's creating a conflict for folks that are using those paths within the existing parks as part of their commuter route. And what we were asking for as part of this is just to have that regional discussion that's currently ongoing as to are there some adjustments that need to be made or enforcement or change in enforcement that needs to be done to make this a non-issue. So I'll stop there. Like I said, I know this one's kind of already out there and already has some legs under it. So, and I don't know, Adam, you may be able to.
Yeah, the managers have been weighing in on this as well, and everyone's in agreement that, there's a different, we have, all of our parks are closed dawn to dusk, but there's a difference in utilization of a path that goes from point A to point B that someone is using after dark to make their way on a commute, et cetera, versus utilization of the facilities. And I think that, at least from the manager's perspective, all of us recognize that. So I'm optimistic that that's a modification that is going to be able to be made. Now it will take working in concert with our local law enforcement in order to reinforce that, but I don't see that is going to be a particularly difficult issue, at least based on the acceptance of the concept.
Carlos, you start this one.
Yeah, no, this has come before me a couple times, and I've spread it out there too, just trying to see where it would belong, and I look forward to that being there being an easy resolution to it.
Eric?
Yeah, same thing. We made a commitment to remove snow from routes that, because of the commuter benefit, but oh, by the way, you can't use it after 5 o'clock. Yeah, we just need to make that change so that we're consistent.
I'm sure everybody honors that. Dustin?
Yeah, I just had a question for clarification. So this is the center region park policy. So this is different than our ordinances that govern this, or this is the center region park policy is governing shared use paths and sidewalks? Just some clarification on that.
The Center Region Parks policy aligns with individual municipality policy in terms of the dawn to dusk requirement.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. So this is something I actually was kind of, in previous, in the Parks and Rec Committee, was something that had come up when I was managing or kind of, custodian of Stony Batter, right? Stony Batter is a different type of park. People access that park all the time outside of, dawn to dusk hours. And there should be no reason why they can't. So I think we need to very seriously consider, different types of parks, of park land, and really define that a little bit further, Like a neighborhood park, Mount Nittany Terrace, it's behind people's houses, sure, yeah, dawn to dusk. We don't want people back there, unless maybe they live there, kids, want to have some fun, but, every now and then. But even then, that's the type of thing that I think this original policy was probably geared towards.
I think so too. Paul?
Well, yeah, absolutely. That begs the question. I think we should include municipal parks as well in this, just to at least mention, because some of them are not center region parks, they're ours.
Yes.
Or county.
Yeah, I guess that was my point, Paul.
Right.
Yeah. We need to read out our ordinances.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, but you bring up an excellent point, and one which occurred to me too. There are different types of parks. That's it.
Great.
Great.
Thank you. Official map revisions. This is something that obviously is going to grow as we work towards the future network. So I don't have a whole lot here, but I do have one that we are recommending removal of, and that's the official map bike pedestrian path in the vicinity of Bollesburg Road. And it's shown there in the circle. Basically Lamont working its way out towards, Warner Boulevard. We've had a number of property owners reach out with some concerns over this one. And we also recognize with the quarry there in the middle of it, the viability of this long-term, at least for the foreseeable future, is pretty limited. So staff is making a recommendation that this be pulled off the official map at this time, with the recognition that at some point in the future it may come back on as the quarry operations die down or cease to exist.
Are you asking for that today?
Just wanted to see what council's
Okay,
thoughts
Eric?
were on that.
Well, I don't understand the harm of leaving it on if it's all on quarry property, because the only time it would become a factor is if the property was to be redeveloped, right?
Yeah, it's
I think
not
it's
all on
more
quarry
than
property
quarry.
though. It does
It's
reach
not?
out, it hits some private property owners, and that's
Oh, it
where we've had
does?
some.
Yes.
It's all the way up.
Yeah, it ties the whole way back into Lamont, so it
Okay.
hits some private properties.
Yeah, it's the former railroad bed.
Right.
Yeah,
And as a result.
we really unfortunately missed the window there many years ago when the right-of-way was given up, because that would have been such a wonderful access. But that ship has sailed, so now we're left with, I guess, this.
Yeah, and in my past life, I have some history with this, is there was a study done to look to make that connection. It was 27 miles, and this was a section of it. And, you know, that vision is great, but, you know, to your point,
Well, once the right-of-way reverted to the property
once it
owners-
reverted, it became pretty impractical. And this section was even deemed infeasible currently in that study because of that reason, the quarry and the reversion of the
Yeah,
easement.
the mistake, in my opinion, I'll bump on my soapbox, was allowing that to happen many, many years ago. In hindsight, obviously, that was, you know, a gross error, given the desire now for connectivity and how that would have been a slam dunk, easy. But yeah, it is what it is. So yeah, I guess so. If it's private property, if there's that many pieces of private property, yeah.
Dustin?
So I'm a little confused because I do remember talking about this and speaking about this connection, and it's supposed, does it go right along the road or does it tear off? Because I'm not seeing it on the maps, that's why I'm asking. I'm not seeing anything along, and it was actually, I brought it up as a point, and I'm glad you started talking about it. I didn't see anything connecting essentially Lamont to Oak Hall, except going, you know, back around by Daleview and up around, right? Which I think, you know, is somewhat feasible. But yeah, so yeah, I'm not seeing it on the pedestrian master plan future connections overview, but maybe I'm
Yeah,
just not.
and you won't because of the recognition of those concerns. It shows up on our current existing official map here at the township level, and our recommendation as part of the plan is just to pull it off of that document and not include it in the pedestrian facilities master plan at this time.
This is it's an off-road facility. It's the former railroad bed. And as a result, it is not, I mean, it's somewhat alongside Bollesburg Road.
Yeah,
and roughly,
mostly not.
Yeah, but mostly it's not.
Yeah, mostly it goes right through the quarry.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to get that clarification then. Yeah, you know, my general comment on that is a shame because that is a huge corridor for biking, running, et cetera, right? And it's a pretty dangerous road, right? Now it is only 25, right? There's not much of a shoulder there at all. One comment too on the maps, you know, just if we look east into township, there is no indication whether these are underserved or well-served communities. There's no shading on that. I do know that there's, you know, not as much of housing density out that way as there could be in, you know, in Lamont, but that is an indication. My only comment to that is, what's the alternate? Is there an alternative? Have we explored an alternative to, if we're taking that off and sweeping it off the rug, is there something else we can pursue?
There are connections, I will tell you, they're not direct, but that you can get to that other side of the community with some of the existing connections, or at least proposed existing connections. It's obviously not as direct, and we recognize that there's some demand for this, but right now, just as it's proposed on the official map, we don't see it as feasible, or, you know, even, you know, again, thinking probably 10, 15, 20 years out, we just don't see a viability for this one right now.
If I could follow up on my comment, I just want to, it doesn't mean that my support for taking it off doesn't mean that I don't recognize that demand that's there. I think we still have an obligation to look at opportunities, whether it's widening the shoulder or whatever, because Dustin's right. I'm one of those people that's taken their life in their hands, you know, on my bike, on that road to get to the Warner Boulevard connection. You know, you're kind of holding your breath the whole time. But removing it from the official map, I don't believe should represent the township throwing their hands up and surrendering here. Hopefully that's...
No, and that's certainly not how it's intended. It's just a recognition of, as it's represented on the official map, it doesn't work.
Right, and that's the railroad bed connection going through the quarry property.
Sure.
And that's the private property ownership, right-of-way that we're concerned with is quarry?
There's more than
quarry
There's others.
and
I'm
there's
sorry.
other individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in theory, you could reconceive the official map line here and take it immediately down Bollesburg Road.
Alongside the road, yeah.
Is that a township? That's a
But that's a
state
state
road.
road.
Right,
And-
but it's important for us to get it on the map
Right.
so that they can consider it.
So, I mean, if there was, but again, I think that the reality is that that connection is likely never going to be made in our lifetimes. That said, it's not an abandonment if we show it, and should PennDOT come through to make an improvement, they must take that into consideration as part of their improvements to Bollesburg.
If we put it alongside the road.
If
Right.
it's put alongside the road. This configuration just is completely impractical.
Yep.
The only alternative to this, to retain an official map road, would simply be to align it directly with Bollesburg Road, or on
Path,
Bollesburg
yeah.
Road.
An official map path or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's what I'm asking.
Yep.
That we consider that as the alternative.
excellent, yeah. Paul?
You guys got to where I was.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's sending absolutely the wrong message to take it off and not have it shown somewhere else, because it really is an important connection. I wonder if I do like the path along the road. The only other thing that occurred to me was maybe that portion up to the quarry could be retained, and then you could, you know, shoot across the road or some sort of a connection that bypasses the quarry, and then, you know, a little section along the road. Because a rail to trail or something like that, I can see that being a hugely popular thing. Now, it's going through private properties. That's the challenge. But I think we don't want to take something away without putting something back on the map. So I'm 100% in favor of that.
Yeah, I would say give us a little time with that one to see what we can come up with at a staff level. And it may be something as simple right now as you said, widening of shoulders, or
Parallel
to make
Adding it to the
to make
pedestrian
a
facilities.
current precarious situation a little better as we're dealing with it. But as it's currently projected in the official map, we just recognize that doesn't work.
Good. Carla?
Not at this time, no.
No, this whole exercise began because we wanted to get paths on the official map, so that when the state came back and started looking at things, that we at least got to have a discussion. So I think that's in line with the reality of the private property rights, unless we're looking at potentially taking, which we're not gonna do because of the quarry. At that point, I think it's prudent to get something potentially doable on the map.
All right, sounds good, thank you. All right, the second portion of recommendations deals with the future pedestrian facilities, and really the only thing we have here is the use of this matrix. And it's trying to give us something quantifiable at a staff level, a tool in the toolbox, so to speak, as we're evaluating these to determine what's our highest priorities as projects come forward. This is just a sample of one that we could utilize. It's a 20-point scoring system tied back to the criteria that were in the previous sidewalk master plan. So roadway functional class, presence of shoulder, closure of existing gap, proximity to transit stop, proximity to parks and schools, presence of sidewalks, arterial or collector streets, and priority corridor. Again, the way I envision this is just a tool that we utilize to give us some quantifiable thing to tie back to say this is why this project ranks above this project above this project. This isn't gospel, and honestly, I'm not sure if it works yet. It goes back to our earlier discussions of we need some real world tests. It's something that I know working with Shane, and again, I can't go through these presentations without tipping my cap to him, that he's already working on tied to the GIS system. Right now, everything that's tied in there is something that he can measure on the GIS system. So he and I need to spend a little time with this to see if this system works or if we need to tweak it accordingly. And I have heard those comments about the thresholds that are in there. I think that's something we need to spend a little bit of time with. But again, wanted to give you something to react to as part of this consideration. And the last plan recommended using the criteria. This was just trying to tighten it up and give you something, something we actually could work with.
Great. Eric, if you would.
Big matrix guy, love it. I think your idea of taking some real world examples and plugging it in will be very beneficial, and not even so much with the numbers, but the weighting. And I think when you plug real-world examples in and you see something that should meet the threshold but doesn't, I think you can simply achieve that by adjusting the weighting. Because right now, the way it's set up, they're all weighted equally. But in reality, some of those things are more important than others. So I think that exercise will help you come up with a proposed weighting of the criteria also, which ultimately may be more important, you know, than the numbers themselves, so.
Good. Dustin?
Just a question for clarification. So is a higher number or a higher weight mean it's a higher priority?
Yes.
Okay. And then just a comment, and it kind of, Carla's earlier comment about as we were discussing some housing and housing density, I don't see that on here. Maybe something to consider for prioritization. That's all I have.
Very good. Paul?
No, I mean, I think all we've talked about already kind of ties back into this matrix, so how it works in real-world examples and other things. You know, I like the concept of it, for sure. And I like that it offers something quantifiable. I worry about boxing ourselves in on the quantifiable. I think there's some element of subjectivity that has to come in here, and maybe that's us. Maybe that's our prioritization coming out of it. But it would be nice to have something objective to look at that would give us some reason.
Yeah, this is based off of, to your point, Paul, this is kind of based off of what we used to do with the long-range transportation plan, again, in my past life, is you had, your first cut was the matrix, and then your next cut was, let's actually talk about this and make some discussions of whether or not what the matrix gave you made sense in the real world, and that's how this is envisioned as a process.
And sometimes it tells you what you already know,
Sure.
but it just puts some numbers behind it and some reasons, and it gives you a framework, I guess. I like that concept, so I agree. Thank you.
Great. Carla?
Thanks, yeah. I agree entirely with Eric's comment and the weights. I had a few comments about the weights. I imagine, for instance, roadway functional classification is pretty weighty, just off the top of my head. But also, like, is proximity to a transit stop weightier than proximity to parks or schools, because you have parks and schools combined? So if it's close to a park and a school, then it still only counts one of those, you know, those kinds of things. I think shoulder should be defined. I can think of some roads that have no striping at all, but, well, Oak Ridge is a perfect example. It didn't have striping before, 3 years ago? You know, does that have a shoulder or no? No, not really, that kind of thing. So that one makes me a little nervous, the presence of shoulder. But, and then also just the consideration of, I feel like it's limiting insofar as it's funny, because now the people we have requesting sidewalk waivers and things like that are the parks and the schools, which we've both run into and have both been very frustrating to me. So what about proximity to neighborhoods? To density of housing, proximity to those things, as Dustin said. But then also proximity, again, another frustrating issue, commercial development. People don't just want to get to their parks and schools, they want to walk to the store that's quarter mile away, but they can't get to, you know. Which brings me, finally, I apologize for all of the comments on this. I love the matrix and the prioritization. I do find the quarter mile, 3/4 mile, greater than 3/4 mile, an interesting number to choose, I guess. I would almost think if something's a quarter mile away, there's so many ways to throw that in the air. It's a coin toss, right? Does it, like, if the park's a quarter mile away, I don't mind walking on the skirt of the road to get there. But if it's a mile away, like, oh, I'm not gonna skirt the road that long. Like, you know, I don't know. It just seems, you could flip them, and I'm not even giving that opinion.
Sure.
I'm just saying, I don't know. I don't know how you weight that.
The thought process when it was put together, and I agree with you, I think you could turn it either way.
Right.
The thought process was, okay, if it's a short stretch, less than a quarter mile, it's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, right.
So that was the thought process, not saying that's right. But that
Maybe
was the original.
maybe it's just an on or off switch, and like Eric said, there's already precedence for something under quarters of a mile to be quote unquote a reasonable distance to walk, right? To something. So maybe it's a yes or no.
Sure.
So is this greater or above? I don't know.
Okay, no, that's all good, because again, this is a sample that's thrown out there, and it's generating the kind of comments I was hoping it would generate.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think these guys are putting out great stuff here for you, Mike.
Yeah.
And I think we'll get it better, but I think the road testing it with some recent projects or ones that we keep talking about, that we want to happen,
Right.
and seeing if they would happen under this, I think is critical. But yeah, I really like Dustin's comment on density being in there.
As long as we're able to measure it, right? That's the key.
Yeah,
An
yeah,
unmeasurable metric in a matrix? What?
in the
Gotta
perfect
be
world,
The shoulder. I mean,
I envision this thing as basically it's automated. The way it's set up now, Shane, with the GIS system, is Shane can drop a project in and calculate based on the thresholds that are there. That's the goal. That's the dream. But that I think we'll look at it initially through that lens of if I can keep it tied to the GIS system and have something where Shane puts a line in the system, hits a button, and it calculates and gives us a score. That's
well,
huge.
maybe to the yes or no with the density
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
You know, is it an R3? Is it R2? Or,
Right.
you know, whatever.
Yeah, those become just buffers around a line.
Yeah.
So I that's not, and it goes back to that discussion of equity of access anyway.
Yes.
You know, is that community, particularly an underserved community, you know, maybe those are the thresholds. So let me work on that a little bit, but this is all great stuff.
Cool.
All right. So implementation strategy is just putting those recommendations into action. I'm going to go through this really quick. The first one is amending the ordinances to include the recommendations. Obviously, we have some work there to do. But each of those are shown up as one of the bullet points under this recommendation. Fee and lieu, waiver process, requirements related to transit facilities, the design requirements, those are included. Those revisions that need to happen that we'll work on as part of this plan. In terms of ranking the projects, using a matrix, we envision something where it's multifaceted in the staff, where the engineer, the director of public works, principal planner, and the GIS tech work together as a team to do the prioritization. Establish and maintain an overall prioritized list of pedestrian facilities. That's the outcropping of that second implementation strategy. And that would be as vetted by council. So the first step is that matrix ranking, and then the second step is your kind of policy level ranking of projects. And that list should be something that is fluid and continues to develop over time. Amend the official map to reflect priority locations, or in the case we discussed, remove ones that don't make sense. Engage in that regional discussion about the conflict of the current park operations versus park paths. And finally, to review this pedestrian facilities master plan on a periodic basis not to exceed 5 years. That's the implementation strategy. It just basically picks up those recommendations and drops it into action items. Any thoughts on those?
Dustin?
I see the 5-year review. I applaud that, keeping up with that review, put that in there. But I wonder whether or not the prioritized list should be reviewed at a lower frequency, perhaps, annually even.
Yeah, as developments go in and, things can change.
The nice thing with, again, kind of making this automated is that, that should be pretty simple.
Yeah.
That we can continually update that list with a couple clicks of the button.
And you'll come back and present that to us, right?
Oh, maybe wearing a different hat, but I'd be happy to.
All right.
Yeah, and the WHO is doing the review is important too. Anything else, Dustin?
That's all.
Cool. Paul?
No, I mean, I like that idea about maintaining it almost as an ongoing kind of a matrix that could be referred to. Maybe I missed it in here, but I wonder if there's something in here about some sort of a periodic review, looking at available grants or other options. I don't know if that's an ongoing kind of a thing. I just wonder if maybe something that we could put in there as sort of an action item to.
For us to apply,
Yeah.
try to apply public dollars to fill in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And I just think having that in there is just kind of a reminder, and it may be something that, you know, because out of sight, out of mind sometimes, and we look at it with developers, but maybe if we knew that there were these other opportunities, whether it's multimodal grants or whatever, you know, maybe we can revisit this on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I'm happy to add that in. The plan doesn't talk a lot about financing the projects because it's a bit of a moving target, but I think it's important to at least throw that in there as a reminder that we should be doing that at a staff level.
Or if somebody sees it, they realize, look, you're not just talking about developer dollars or township dollars.
Right.
We're talking about, you know, partnerships here and,
Right.
and leveraging.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, just like that, you know, they're required to put 5-foot sidewalk in. If we think that's a good place for an 8-foot, then we need to find a way to make that
And
happen.
if maybe there's some state or federal dollars that
Sure.
we can help
Well-
to extend that and make it more of a larger project, that might be something.
Yeah, that and those ones that aren't gonna be redeveloped anytime in our foreseeable future. You know, we're gonna have to find a mechanism to get those in place, because there's a lot of very important ones that probably aren't gonna happen if we don't do that,
Right.
so. Carla?
Nothing new, thank you.
Eric?
These are not necessarily chronological, are they?
No.
Because, I mean, we could start number 5 tomorrow.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. But the thought is that number 3 would happen before number 4? Or,
Yes and no. You know, I think that I may tweak the wording of that a little bit. Yeah, you would like to have at least your first list looked at and update your map. So yeah, that one probably makes some sense to happen in that order. Actually, 2, 3, and 4.
2, 3, and 4.
That's probably sequential, but the rest of them, no, there's no priority there. It's just,
the only reason I bring that up is that when we get to number 4, we're going to have lots of people in the room.
right.
So we would like to have the oops ones vetted out first before we get to the official map, because that's going to draw attention.
It'll be official category.
Oops. Could you put that in the legend? Put that in the legend.
Could that be an overlay?
Is that an overlay? The oops overlay.
We can do that.
Otherwise, great.
All right.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of these could be simultaneous and everything, you know, yeah.
All right, well, great, thank you, I appreciate, you answered all the questions that we talked about, gave me great feedback. We'll obviously have a heavy lift between now and the 20th, but we're up to it. So in terms of next steps, still aiming for 100% complete draft plan delivered to council on January 20th. At that time, if you are happy with where the document is, or at some point in the future, if you're not, the next steps would be to remand it to Planning Commission and the Parks and Recreation Committee for their respective reviews, as well as sending it on to Center Regional Planning Agency and MPO staffs for their respective reviews. Those can happen certainly concurrently, or in sequential order, however is chosen. Once those reviews are done and a draft is approved by this body, then the recommendation is to hold a second public input period. We held one early to talk about project specific. Now we want to talk about the larger document itself and how it makes sense, and ultimately moving towards adoption. So we're in that process now, where, you know, here once we get into the end of January, hopefully that plan, if I've done my job well enough, is in a place where you can start remanding it and fine tuning it and moving it towards adoption, hopefully sometime this spring.
Excellent.
Very cool.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, staff has everything they need from us at this point.
I believe we do.
Excellent.
Appreciate your patience. I know that was a long one, but it gave me what I needed. So.
I appreciate all the work. Yeah.
Is everybody okay to continue on, or do you need 5 minutes, or we're about at the hour 45 mark? You're good? Everybody good? Okay. Then we will move on. OB2, Historically Significant Properties Draft Ordinance O-22-01. Lindsay?
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. I have a brief PowerPoint presentation to go along with the memo that I provided to you. So can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So as you know, back in August, council, after some requests from the community, from community members, remanded to the Planning Commission a request to include some more flexibility in zoning regarding historically significant structures or properties within the township. So the Planning Commission took their time, as the remand stated, and between September and December of 2021, the Planning Commission and staff, along with some other community members, carefully evaluated the options. And after a few meetings, we came up with the following here. Just to go over where we started. Staff made a presentation to council and both and the Planning Commission regarding the difference in the boundaries. And I think that was one way to kind of clarify how we're moving forward. The boundary differences between the Lamont Historic District, the Lamont as the census designated place, Oak Hall as a historic district, and then the actual zoning, village zoning district we have. We went through and reviewed minutes back from 1960 to present. We did consider an overlay throughout the process, and also consider doing nothing, which is always an option, of course. And we did include community members in the conversations with the history of the first appearance of anything related to historic regulations within the zoning district, leading back to, or going back to 1982. So where we are now, after those months of planning discussions, we are presenting to council the option or the solution for flexibility would be adding historically significant structures / properties to each use table within the zoning district, within the zoning ordinance as a conditional use. The conditional use process, of course, requires public hearing, requires property posting, public notice, requires staff review, planning commission review, and then ultimately council makes their final decision with the ability to tack on any reasonable conditions if necessary. So, one thing I did want to note within the memo, I did include the ordinance with strikeouts and also the bold and italic letters, which were the additions. In that ordinance under section 200-7 definitions, 1 and 2, we're going to remove those. And we're going to remove those because we define them below in number 3 and then further define them in number 4 to lessen any confusion. That's what the plan is there. So with that, we're going to remove that language, and as you saw in the ordinance, other regulations remain for the village district specifically regarding parking and parking lots and so forth. As we went through this, we kept in mind that this ordinance is, the intention was to create a strong foundation for which can be built upon in the future if the need is there. So the solution then to add the flexibility relates to all of these properties shown on the map on your screen. Frank Stott and Shane Adams, our ordinance enforcement officer and our GIS technician, worked together. Frank took the properties from the publication that's mentioned throughout this property, which is the Remembrance of Things Past, back from 1982, and that was prepared by the Center Regional Planning Commission. The borough uses that as their reference as well for historic properties or historically significant properties. That's probably the most updated list we have. As we move forward with this ordinance and this educational process for the public, we hope to get more included, with anything that is defined as historically significant is included on this map and then in that definition. So Frank was able to pinpoint these locations on our zoning map, and then Shane was able to digitize all of these points. And now we have this map, which is pretty excellent because a lot of municipalities in the county don't have this information digitized as of yet. So going back, we are going to include historically significant structures or properties as a conditional use in all of the zoning districts. We will then go through and change all of our use tables to include that and make changes or make additions to Chapter 87, which is our conditional use chapter. The most recent conditional use council saw was the IRA and including the Stuckey Mitsubishi dealership within the industrial revitalization area. So the conditional use process, and we did check with our solicitor, we wanted to allow this to allow folks who want to change any property that's historically significant the ability to modify the structure or the property if they need relief from height requirements, from setback requirements. This can all then be presented to council and, through the application process, and you can make the decision from there. We did change the intent statement slightly. We did add some things. So we want to preserve, of course, what exists and encourage, as I noted back to that map, more residents to get into this program or get their property on that map. There's a strong educational component to this ordinance, and we wanted to lay that foundation so in the future, if there is a need, if we do adopt this ordinance, and a lot of people are taking advantage of what the new regulations are, then folks will be more aware of what exists and take advantage of the Secretary of Interior's guidelines for restoration and so on. And then, of course, we're going to encourage the use of those guidelines established by the Secretary of Interior and the foundation for a stronger ordinance, establish the foundation for a stronger ordinance, and to regulate the historically significant properties in all zoning districts through the conditional use process. So one other thing I wanted to note in the ordinance is that there were a list. So Chapter 200-40 in the ordinance is considered historic property. And that at one point prohibited uses. We removed that because we didn't feel that we need to prohibit any uses anymore because the zoning zoning will be permitted by conditional use and in each district. So whatever each district will still continue to apply, but we're adding this use, historically significant uses within each zoning district. Mark Rosick was, up and on board for this whole process. So if you have any, questions, or Mark, if you want to say anything, please feel free. But tonight we're just asking you to consider moving this forward. while remaining aware, as I mentioned, that this is an educational and a foundational ordinance, and actually, it's been a year now, so it's kind of exciting to say that, you know, I like to work with an ordinance for at least a year just to see how things play out. It's been fun the past couple of weeks, looking back into the residential rental ordinance, the chicken ordinance, everything that we've really been updating just to see how it's working. And it really proves to be a good process. So we're asking you tonight, or today, to move this forward to the public hearing process so we can get it moving forward. And I hope that the outcome of this presentation today is really what council intended to see once the remand was sent to the planning commission. So with that, if you have any questions or comments, I'm here.
Thank you, Lindsay. Questions or general comments? Paul?
Thank you. Lindsay, maybe you can help me out here on just answering a couple of questions that I had and going through this. I think I got myself maybe turned around a little bit or got a little confused. Let's just start with the sections, the numbered lines. Right there at number 50, I have a note to myself. It says 1 and 2 currently exist in the zoning ordinance, consider modifications. And then you go on to list 3 and 4. Are you suggesting replacement of 1 and 2 or adding those in addition to?
No, so thanks for noticing that, Paul. When I presented this to the planning commission, I had some little extra notes in here for them to consider. And line 50 is one of them. The historic properties and historic structures, number 1 and number 2, are what currently exists in the ordinance. We're suggesting to remove those and just include number 3 as the reference to historically significant properties or structures, just going off of that 1982 publication.
So if I understood that, you're talking about replacing 1 and 2 with 3 and 4.
Correct.
But, yeah, if I may also, Lindsay, just to try to clarify. 1 and 2 currently exist in the ordinance, as well as 3 and 4.
Nope, 3 and 4 will be newly added. They're both
Okay, then it
in
would be a
italic,
replacement.
So
they will be added.
okay, they should have been struck through then, in my opinion, so that we could understand this in terms of looking at the ordinance. Those should have been struck through. And the reason that I am concerned about this is, you know, my background in archaeology and historical archaeology and those kind of things. I worry about tying our ordinance to a publication that isn't tied to something like the National Register of Historic Places. You know, it may be a fine publication, but it's not peer-reviewed, it's not vetted, it's not flexible, it doesn't change over time, it is a point in time, and we're taking it as foundational information, and I'm personally very uncomfortable with taking that as the final word on historical structures in the township or regionally. So if it was in addition to, that makes great sense to me. But I worry about replacing it 1 and 2 wholesale with that.
So your suggestion, instead of just having the one document, you have the existing documents and that?
Yeah, I think
yeah.
both. I mean, I do think because there's different mechanisms for both. There are clearly criteria that have been laid out and applications that are made and other things. You know, there may be a historical property that turns up that nobody knew was historic because it was covered up by later.
And it wasn't in the 1992.
And it wasn't in the 1992, and then we're stuck because we have no idea. It's a minor point, but it's something I worry about varying too far from the standard, if you will. Does that make sense to everybody? Am I alone in this? That one jumped out at me. The other thing is, beginning on line 57, I don't know if that really needs to be in definitions, because it's really about how you treat the property, not the property itself. It's a guide. I mean, if it needs to be in definitions, that's great, but it's not about defining something within the ordinance. It's about what you do when you have something that's within the ordinance. So I don't know whether that's the right place for it or not. I just had a concern about that. Yeah, I mean, other than that, there's a couple of places where, you know, it says stands rather than standards. I think that's probably just a copy-paste error, those kind of things. But my major concern with moving this forward is about replacing that. I'm comfortable with the addition, not with the replacement. And then the only other thing that I noticed was in the sample notice here, and maybe this is part of the MPC, but it says an opportunity to contact the owner. This is beginning on line 141 where you have the sample notice. Maybe this is standard, but it says opportunity to contact the owner and to point out other options to possibly prevent demolition. Wouldn't it be the owner and the township? Because ultimately that might be part of the condition. I mean, it's just sort of appealing to the landowner. I don't know whether that's part of the MPC.
Actually, I think this is actually part of PHMC, is it not? Language. This exact notice was used one other time in my tenure here in College Township, when the barn at Barnbridge, residential development, was actually demolished. That was a residential structure. This is the exact notice, somewhat modified, that was utilized in that regard. So, and that was lifted directly from the Pennsylvania Museum and Historic Commission language, or possibly even the National Register language. So I don't believe it's an MPC issue, but it does have other regulatory input. So
it just seemed to me going only to the owner and not to any of the other interested parties might be somewhat limiting.
we'll take another look at that.
Thanks. That was all I had, but it seems fairly significant. I would really like to see the strike-throughs and the additions more
Sure.
clearly.
I was going to say, so if I'm hearing you right, you'd like to see most of the language in line 30 and 31 added into the area of line 52 to 55.
I think he wants number 2 as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to not limit our definition of a historic structure to just the reference to the.
No, I agree,
resources.
but
I'm sorry.
so all of number 2 references back to line 30 and 31, which is
Yeah.
the properties listed in the United States Department of Interior, National Register, of course,
Right.
historic places. The rest of the historic structure references National Register, of course.
Sure, yeah, it's a chunk.
National
1 and
Register,
2
yeah,
are-
yeah. So if we got the main document, then we've probably got it
Yeah.
covered in the next.
And then line 52 would not be number 3, it would be number 1. So I was really confused.
It would move up to line 30, yes.
Yeah, but it would also be item number 1.
Yep, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
And it would be standalone,
and it would be standalone.
right?
And
that's
just,
the issue.
and then the second part of that issue is that I'm very uncomfortable tying our definitions to some publication that may
No,
or may not
I
be
got that.
authoritative.
I agree with the strikeouts. It is a little bit confusing. But basically, if we're confirming, Lindsay, should we agree with line 52 through 64, they would replace lines 30 through 50. Yes.
Yes.
Is that agreeable?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, just so, because if we're moving towards a hearing, we want to make sure that we're very specific in what changes we're going to make before it gets,
Agreed.
potentially gets put to hearing.
Now, what I'm hearing is that's what Paul has an issue with.
Yeah,
Absolutely, and I understand that.
yep,
because-
yeah, and no, I'm just clarifying, and I think we're all in agreement with it. Now, the one addition, I would go to it. So in addition to 52 through 64, replacing 30 through 50, Paul is also requesting the majority of the language in 30 and 31, which is properties listed in the United States Department of Interior National Register of Historic Places, be injected into what is currently 52 to 55.
To be retained.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think just looking at what's in 33 through 48, there may be some of that I think would also be reasonably carried over.
Okay.
In looking at that. And other than that, I would just have sort of de minimis changes or questions on, say, for example, line 80 and line 97, where it refers to the document. I just want to check the spelling, that's the standards for the treatment of historic properties as opposed to the stands, those kind of
Okay,
things.
yeah, thanks for getting
Yeah,
that.
and that, I mean, those are de minimis. And then my only other question was about the sample notice. So apologies if I confuse things, but I think
Nope.
you've summarized it quite.
No, I think they were needed. They were needed. Dustin?
Nothing additional.
Excellent. Eric?
I agree with Paul. I don't know anything about what he's talking about, but I agree that it doesn't make sense to refer to a document that's a single point in time and not peer-reviewed and updated. That makes all the sense in the world. Quick question for Lindsay. A year or so ago, when we were looking at this kind of in the context of a particular issue that came up, we weren't sure that we really needed to do anything, and we remanded it to Planning Commission. When staff and Planning Commission dug into this, was it clear that these were needed changes, or was all of this done just in response to council's remand back to Planning Commission? Not what I'm really asking for is, was there a clear consensus among Planning Commission members that these changes need to be made and these are good changes? And they're not just going through the motions here with another council remand?
You want me to take that, Lindsay?
Yeah, that'd be great, Mark, thank you.
Actually, there was extensive conversation with Planning Commission regarding this. They fully vetted the option of doing nothing, but they were aware that we do have a lot of significant historic properties, and they sort of tended to agree with council when it was remanded for them to look at, to provide some flexibility if and only when a property owner can show the historic significance and show proof that it was done. But they vetted thoroughly whether or not they needed to be pursued, and they decided, this is designed to allow for changes in extreme circumstances that would enhance properties back to their original historic value.
That is great to hear, honestly. What's what I was hoping to hear, but it was still great to hear. Thanks.
It is, and it goes back to the original request from the property owner.
Yes.
They said, I'm not asking this just for my property. I think this is in the best interest of the township. And that was kind of what moved council to push it to Planning Commission, and I'm glad they heard that message. And I'm glad they came forward like they did.
Yeah.
Anything else, Eric? Carla?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, at the 100-foot view, I think that this is great. I'm really just pleased to see a solution to this. I think the conditional use process makes a lot of sense, and I don't have a whole lot of heartburn with the ordinance itself. My only thought is, and take it or leave it, but why aren't we referring to our own map of historic properties that, as you said, you're hoping that people get, if they have historic properties, that they get them registered and that we are able to add them to our own map. Just a thought. I think Paul's heartburn is that that definition number 3 limits it exactly to that moment in time, 1982, exactly what was on that document. Yeah, it didn't open it up to the updates that maybe have happened since then if somebody didn't make that publication or whatever. I don't have a problem with definition number 4. I almost wonder if we could shorten it, shorten the term so that that whole long title is defined. I don't know. That's a long title.
Too many capitals in that paragraph.
Yeah, so, but I understand entirely why you defined the terms, just because it is a term talked about in the ordinance, so I don't have a problem with that. That's it for me, thanks.
Great. Paul, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just a real quick one. I want to make sure that whatever we do is consistent with some of the other guidelines and requirements from the federal, National Register of Historic Places. You know, I would just want to make sure that we do sort of a side-by-side comparison to make sure that anything in our ordinance does not conflict with funding or requirements. Because I know, for example, like, I had a friend who owned a historic house in Austin. They didn't even know it was, or the person who sold it to them didn't even know it was because of later improvements. Then they started to deconstruct. They wanted to put in electrical. Well, you know, there were certain restrictions around that. So they had to work with code and, you know what I mean? It's like, I would really want to make sure that we're consistent with what.
Well, which
With
would
what?
you prefer as the prevailing document, the national?
I think the National Register of Historic Places, if I'm not mistaken, the state defers to the National Register
Sure.
as well. Maybe we could investigate that a
Well,
little bit,
or you can
too.
just put language, if there's
Well-
if there's any
State or
contradiction,
federal, yeah,
the national document shall prevail.
supersede or
Well, I
something.
think the document that's identified in number 4 on line
Right,
57 is in essence the National Register requirements, the standards.
and I guess what I'm saying is we should reference back to that to say in the case of any sort of conflict between existing
That would
ordinances and
supersede.
Yeah.
that should supersede. That
Yeah, that's
was what
easy
I was trying to
language,
say.
yeah.
Gotcha.
And the other thing, maybe you want to age-proof this, you know, like you're using this document, well, when they update their document, if we don't update too, then we're not,
Gotcha.
you know, so maybe
Or
the
subsequent
most current,
revisions.
or yes, subsequent revisions.
Okay.
Yeah,
A lot of times I just write as, like the
Amended.
MPC always says, as reenacted and amended.
Yes.
So then, you know, it just covers any changes
Right.
to that.
Yeah.
But I appreciate all of your comments and, you know, we'll get together and take them all into consideration, of course.
so does council want to see this again, then?
Do we need a motion to table?
I don't think we
think
need a
so.
motion to
There's no
table.
clock.
Yeah, there's no clock on this, so. But I just want to make clear that we're not going to move forward with a public hearing today. We'll want to see another draft that shows the comments from today. Okay, everybody good on that? Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent.
When are we looking for that draft?
Probably at our first or second meeting in February at this point, Lindsay.
Yeah, that'd be fine. I could have it ready for the first meeting.
Okay.
The pedestrian is going to consume and
Well,
should consume the
On the
20th.
20th, we'll be busy with that.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
so we'll shoot for the first meeting in February. Jen, do you have a date?
Third.
The 3rd of February.
Okay. And when it comes back forward, if we could have the hearing date,
Sure.
proposed hearing date as well.
Very good.
on that. Thanks. Okay. Unless there's anything else on OB2, we don't have anybody in attendance from the audience or from the public to comment on this. New business 1, PSAT's annual conference attendance. Adam.
Yeah, basically, we've identified Mr. Takak as our voting delegate for the PSAT's annual conference, April 24th to 27th. The question at hand here is registration will be opening up within the next week, and we're trying to get a head count of those individuals that may be interested in attending either for the entire session or for certain days of the PSATS convention. So if you happen to know right now, if you are interested in attending all or some of the convention, you can let us know that now, or please be sure that you are conveying that information to Jen at the earliest possible time. This afternoon is great, tomorrow morning,
Before you're allowed to leave the building.
but we are going to need to know that relatively soon. in order to prepare for the registration process. So that is, Jen, unless I'm missing anything, I think that was the entirety,
Yeah.
what we wanted to try
January
to.
11th, we have to register.
Right. So, that's it. Thank
it.
you.
May I make a quick request?
Sure, Paul.
Jen, can you find out what day that business meeting is on specifically? I may or may not be able to attend all 4 days, which would probably be okay with everyone, I assume, that I show up for the business meeting and do those kinds of things. But
Usually at the end, they
yeah, that's what I
It's
thought.
changed a little bit. I
Yeah.
think,
This last one was so compressed, it was
Yeah.
literally like a day and a half, so I wasn't sure over a 3.5 day conference
I'll
what
do
that
it
looked like.
today or something.
Thank you.
Okay. Staff informatives. Council have any questions for staff on anything? Go ahead, Eric.
Chicken coop violation.
Yep.
Is this our first one? No.
First violation. Yeah, this was actually, they did have a permit for their chickens. We never got the call to check the placement of the coop. We had a neighborhood complaint, and it was much larger than it should have been, and it was out of compliance with setbacks. The property owner happily disbanded the operation. They said they had their fun with their chickens. COVID was part of the reason they got it, and they didn't want to deal with it anymore, so everything, the structure's all under.
easy peasy.
Timing was good.
So they got a permit, they just didn't follow the
Yeah,
requirements.
they got the permit, got the birds, but we never, we wait for someone to call and say, hey, it's ready for
Right.
inspection. Because a lot of times people will get the permits and not follow through to go any further.
Okay. Just curious.
Sure. Yeah, I was curious too, why they didn't decide to go through the permit process, but they did.
Yes.
Anything else on staff informatives? Any council or staff other matters? Go ahead.
I might. This is related to a lot of conversations and even some correspondence that we've had regarding the Aspen Heights development in Center Hills Village. I would really be interested to hear thoughts from the manager, from staff, from the zoning officer, others, whether it might be reasonable to take a look at some of our allowances, I guess, for construction, because there are really some significant issues that the residents are dealing with. One is the effect of the dust that's being created by the quarrying and, well, not quarrying, but processing of stone that's happening on site. It really has become an onerous issue for those adjacent properties. The second issue is the hours allowed for construction. I wonder if we might look at adjusting those for long-term projects. I understand if it's gonna be a week, but if it stretches into months or potentially a year, it becomes a really significant burden with the noise and with some of the operations. I do think that that's something that we as council should take a look at and be responsive to. And then the third thing was, maybe you guys can fill me in. There was a fire on site. What we know about that and what precautions are being taken to ensure that something similar doesn't happen adjacent to that tree line, because, I understand it's not
Good new call.
probably a significant fire hazard, but those three items, I really wanted to bring to the table because I think they're items of great concern to the residents in the area.
Okay, I guess we'll start with the fire.
Okay.
It's one of these things that happen. I don't feel comfortable discussing what caused it because I've heard kind of supposition. I mean, there can be a fire occur anywhere. The township, fortunately, we went through the addressing and all of those sort of things, and the fire company was able to find it quickly. It doesn't appear from the rumors I'm hearing of the inside of what happened, there was nothing careless or with what went on. It was just one of those things.
Mark, bottom line, code
Yeah.
Yes.
inspects these trailers before they're allowed to be occupied by the contractor, correct?
Yes.
The fire inspector has responsibility. I don't know if the actual report has been completed yet. I've not seen it. But that is something we can make available once
gonna be
we've
my
received it.
request, whatever the official report
And
is.
then that way we'll have the firsthand account of that information. But this falls into the domain of Center Region Code, fire inspection, and yeah, if in fact there were violations, I'm not aware of any, but if there were, those would be identified within that report. So we can certainly follow up on.
And then I
that.
guess the follow-on to that would be, let's make sure that everything is in compliance to prevent
Absolutely.
that moving forward, if there were any sort of reasonable.
Sure.
As far as modifications to the hours of construction activity, this would be something for council to decide if they wanted to go that route or not. But bear in mind, a reduction in the allowable hours to work could turn that one-year project into a year and a half or 2-year project. So do you want to take it all at once, or do you want to drag it out? That is something that's going to have to be,
Right,
the council's gonna
those
be-
are things that we can basically provide you with the information that we have on the books right now in terms of what our local ordinances are. We can submit that to council and we can have that conversation and review those hours. It has periodically come up. We have, a number of years ago, some of you may recall, we've had conversations with respect to the start of the operations of the Ocall Quarry. And so we've had extensive conversations about start and stop times in the past. It's been some time since those have been revisited, and certainly we can do that and have those conversations.
Yeah, and if I might, just speaking on behalf of the residents, I mean, I think duration, season, there may be some other, and also not only noise, but light and other things. I hadn't heard that one specifically, but I think it's worth reviewing, particularly given the fact that we don't have these kind of projects immediately adjacent to a residential area very often.
And when you do that, if you could look at our neighboring municipalities, because you have contractors working, we don't want to set
Dramatically different
Yeah,
standards,
yeah.
sure, understood.
So if we can take a look at
And I think that similar comment would hold for the initial item that you mentioned with respect to dust. We allow certain types of activities to occur on construction sites. Granted, I think that what has been occurring in terms of the crushing operation up there far exceeded anybody's anticipation of the volume of that type of work that would be occurring. It is permitted at the moment based on our own definitions and rules and regulations. But again, that is something I think that we can bring back to council and we can review and perhaps make adjustments as necessary.
Can I pipe in a little bit on as far as the rock crushing goes?
Yeah.
On one aspect, it's a really good thing from an environmental standpoint. In fact, you have this rock that's on site, you got two choices. Haul it away and bring another rock, or use it. And they chose to crush this rock, and it's going to be used for behind all of their retaining walls. It's going to be probably used for the subbase for the driveways and the parking lots and such. So in that way, it's good because it's reduced the amount of truck traffic that's going to be required. Now, as far as the dust and dust trespass, if there was some issues there, maybe we need to look at something in our ordinance that would maybe specify better dust control. I know that they said they were watering it down. Some of that crushing occurred during the 1 or 2 weeks this year. We didn't have rain every day. So we did have quite a bit of dust. I don't know that it actually trespassed that much, but you could see it.
I can assure you that it did. I walked those, and you could just run your finger along any surface and know it's
So
significant
maybe we need to tweak or have something in our ordinance that does require better dust suppression. But from an environmental standpoint, I like to see the stone on site, used on site, rather than hauling it away and then bringing other stone in. Because all they're gonna do is they're gonna haul it away and crush it somewhere else and then bring it back.
Yeah, and it saves the road. No,
Yeah.
that makes perfect sense to me.
But,
And I think it makes perfect sense to the residents, but day after day,
Yeah,
6 days
you
a
get
week,
tired of that.
I mean, it has become a significant issue that I think we need to address.
Yeah,
as
I think
council.
something in the ordinance that would say a long-term operation, which we would have to define, over a week or something, provide a dust suppression plan, noise suppression,
Yes.
put this thing as far away from other residents as you can, so,
Yep.
so that's something we definitely could look at.
Thank you.
Well, the reality is a lot of stuff in our ordinance is because something happened. So let's learn, we'll learn from this and hopefully we can, push some things forward. I'm sure we're not the first one to have to deal with this issue, so there should be some stuff available. But very good points, and so the takeaway was the manager is gonna bring back something to us
That's correct.
on hours and some types of these operations that we wanna look at.
Thank you.
Okay? Oh, and to post the fire report when
Yep.
available.
Absolutely.
Anything else, other matters? Seeing nor hearing none, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are I will second, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Congratulations, everyone.
Oh,
Thank you,
picture.
everybody.